Hello everyone and welcome to this Tinkershop tutorial. My name is Martin from the Innisfil Idea Lab and Library, and today I'm going to go over how to design laser engraved bookmarks. And we're going to be using Inkscape as our software, as we usually do with our laser engraved projects. And this is a really good project if you're new to laser engraving as well as new to Inkscape, because we're going to cover a lot of the basics. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is start up Inkscape, and so we have a new document. I already created one. I'm just going to get rid of this stuff here. And so we have to think of, basically what a bookmark is in the context of laser cutting and engraving it. So you think the shape of the bookmark, that's what we're going to cut out. And so we'll need a rectangle, and we'll have to set that rectangle as a cut line. So it'll cut out the shape of our bookmark. And then we also have to think about what we're engraving on it. So we might add some text and some images, and we'll go over that later. But the first thing we have to do is create the shape of our bookmark, so then we can put all the content onto it. So to do that, you're going to go ahead and click on the rectangle and square tool on the left hand side here. And then you're just going to click on your page and drag it to make a rectangle. Don't really worry about the exact size of your rectangle right now. We'll set that. So just get something onto the page. And so here you see I have a rectangle. And if your rectangle comes out as a different color, or you don't see it at all, that's because Inkscape will default to the last setting that you used for creating rectangles. So if you don't see anything, or it's a different weird color, it doesn't really matter what color it is, but you can control that by going to Object, Fill and Stroke, and then under Fill, you can change the fill color, set it to solid. You can change the stroke, which is the outline of our shape. But for right now, we're just getting the shape, so don't really worry about that too much. And then, of course, you can control the corners of your rectangle by dragging this circle here. So by default, your square might come out perfectly square like that. And using the rectangle tool, you can drag this circle to make the corners a little bit rounded, which I do recommend. Otherwise, they can come out kind of sharp. So I always like to round my corners a little bit just by dragging this down a little bit. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing we would do is, I'm just going to close this window here. We would size our bookmark. So I'm going to do this in centimeters. So if you click on the selection tool and make sure you click on your shape, you'll always see if your shape is selected, because it'll have this dotted line around it with the arrows. And the width and the height of your shape will appear at the top here. I'm going to change it from millimeters to centimeters. If you prefer to measure in inches, you can set it to inches as well. And so the first thing I'm going to do is set the width of my bookmark. So, it's kind of your preference, but I'm going to make mine about 5 centimeters wide. So under the width value here, with my rectangle selected, I'm going to click and highlight this and type in 5 and press enter on my keyboard. Okay. And then the length of it, again, it's whatever you want it to be. I'm just going to make mine 12 centimeters. So under height, I'm going to type in 12 and press enter. Awesome. So this might look small, but that is 5 by 12 centimeters. And yeah, that looks great. The next thing we're going to want to do, now that we have the size and the shape of our bookmark, we are going to set this as a cut line. So we don't want it to engrave this whole thing. Right now it's filled in with a solid color, so it would just engrave what we see here. But we want to get rid of this colored infill and then just set the stroke, the outer line, to a cut line. Okay, so to control the fill color and the stroke color and style, you're going to go up into Object, Fill and Stroke. Make sure that you have our rectangle selected. And then you'll notice in this Fill and Stroke window, there's 3 tabs: Fill, Stroke Paint, and Stroke Style. So first we're going to set our fill, and we're going to set it to no fill. So we're going to click this X, and there you go. We don't see anything now because there's no fill and there's no stroke. So we're going to go to Stroke Paint and make sure that's set to solid. And then go over to Stroke Style. And so here's where we can set the thickness of our stroke. So I can click this plus and make it thicker, and now we can see it. But we want it to be a very specific dimension in order for our laser engraver to interpret this line as a cut line. So right now, it would just engrave this line. So in order to make it a cut line, we have to set the thickness, the width of the stroke, to 0.001 inches. Anything above that is going to engrave, so it has to be 0.001 inches. So under the Stroke Style tab, I'm going to click where it says millimeters and change this to inches. And then in the width box, I'm just going to set the value to 0.001 and press enter. And you can see now, you can't really see this at all. It is there. If I zoom in, we can see the line, our cut line. But this is going to be kind of hard to design when we can't really see it. It's just because it's so thin. If you're using the newest version of Inkscape at the time of this video, which is Inkscape 1.0, they just added a feature to make really thin lines like this visible, no matter if you're zoomed in or out. So I'll tell you how to do that. If you don't have the latest version of Inkscape, consider upgrading, or you can temporarily set this width to like a little bit higher, like 0.017 inches. And then you can design and then just remember to set it back to 0.001 when you're ready to save the final file. So to set, but if you're using the newest version of Inkscape, how to make this line visible and keep it 0.001 is you select the line and then you go up into view, and then under display mode, click where it says visible hairlines. And now you can see it makes that line visible even though it's still 0.001, and I can zoom out and it always makes that line visible. Okay, so now that we have the shape of our bookmark that's going to cut out, we can fill it with text and images, and that's great. So you can just close this fill and stroke window. We don't need it anymore. And we're ready to add some content. So as I said, you can add both images and text. Let's go over text first because it's pretty easy. You're just going to click on the text tool on the left-hand side here, and then just click anywhere on your page. Don't worry about positioning your text yet, because it's just easier to just click somewhere, write it out, and then we'll size it and move it into place after. So just click on your page, and I'm not gonna get super creative. I'm just gonna type in my name, And so that's great. I have my name on the page. And next thing you'd want to do probably is change the font of your text. So what style your text is. And there's a whole bunch of fonts here at the top when you're using the text tool. But I find this kind of hard to navigate unless you know exactly what the name of the font is. But if you want to explore different fonts, perhaps a better way, in my opinion, is to use the text and font menu. So to do that, you're going to click text in the top menu and then click on text and font. So that opens this text and font window, and you can see I have the list of fonts installed on my computer, and I can cycle through them by using the up and down arrows on my keyboard. And as I do that, you can see it gives me a nice preview of what my text on my page will look like with that font. So you can just cycle through these and find a font that you like. Once you're happy with one, like I think this one looks pretty good, you can just hit apply. And notice that will change the font on your page. Additionally, if you want all text objects in the future to use this same font, you don't want to go and have to like set it back to this font every time, you can click on set as default, and that will set this as my default font. So now if I click and create a new text object, you'll notice it automatically sets it to that because we set it as our default. So that's great. Now the next thing you could do is move your text onto your bookmark. And when we want to move things around, we got to switch to the selection tool. So click on the selection tool, and that's always what we're going to use anytime we want to move something or resize it. We have to make sure we're using the selection tool. You can't do that with the text tool because it's just made for creating text. So make sure that you're always using the right tool for what you want to do. So I'm just going to click and drag my text into my bookmark, and you'll notice as I resize the text, I'm just using these corner arrows, and I'm holding control on my keyboard, and that's what's allowing it to scale evenly. If I'm not holding control and I do this, you can easily kind of stretch or smush your text. So usually you want to scale objects evenly, so make sure you hold control, or on Mac it would be command while you're scaling. And so you can move your text kind of to wherever you want. Maybe you want to rotate it a little bit, so notice these arrows on the corner. Those are the arrows I use for resizing the object. But if you want to rotate it, you can click on it a second time, and that will toggle these arrows to rotational arrows. So now if I click on them, I can rotate my text. So maybe you want it kind of on an angle like that. Sure, I'll click on it a second time to change it back to resizing arrows, and maybe we'll make it a little bit larger. Cool. So for our example, I think that is good enough. You can spend some more time making your text look amazing. But next, we're going to learn how to add some images onto our bookmark. Okay, so I can close out this text and font window. We're done with that. So in order to get a nice engravable image, we can just do a Google search of what you're looking for. So we can just search for something like books, and then go to images. And we get lots of images of books. But these types of, like photographic images aren't great for laser engraving because the laser engraver just burns everything in one solid color, so to speak. So what we need is a silhouette. So for whatever you're searching for, make sure you include the keyword silhouette. And then you'll get lots of examples of great engravable images. So I'm not going to spend too much time just looking for an image. Let's just grab something, preferably something just black on white is going to work best. So click on the image and then right click on it and select copy image. And then we'll go back into Inkscape, right click and paste. And great, we have a nice image like this. I'm going to make it smaller. And now if we look at this image and we zoom in, you can see all of the pixels because this is a bitmap image, meaning it's a PNG or a JPEG, and it's made up of pixels. The problem with laser engraving this is the edges are kind of fuzzy, especially if we zoom in or if it's a low resolution image. So it's best to convert this into a vector graphic. And vector graphics use XY coordinates to basically draw and render out an image. So they're a lot better resolution. And it's really easy to convert a bitmap to a vector in Inkscape, and I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So make sure you have your image selected and then click on Path in the top menu and Trace Bitmap. And you can see there's a whole bunch of settings and stuff here, but if you have a black on white image, then you don't have to change this at all. If your image is maybe a little bit lighter of a color, you can increase this threshold a little bit. The default being 0.45. So to execute the tracing of our bitmap image, we just click OK. Alright, and then I'm going to close out of this trace bitmap window. And what that does is create a vector copy right over top of the image. So I have to click on it and move it over so that I can now see our original and our vector copy. And it can be a little bit hard to tell which one is which. I mean, the vector will appear at the top. But I mean, one way is if you zoom in on the bitmap, the original, the edges are all pixelated and fuzzy. If I zoom in on our vector copy, you can see the lines are always perfectly straight. The other way to tell is using this edit path tool. If I click on that with my bitmap selected, it shows nothing because there's no path, it's just pixels. If I click on my vector, on the other hand, you can see it now shows the nodes that outline and create the vector path of our image. So it's just a series of nodes that are connected with a different degree of curve in between each one, and together they basically create our image instead of using a grid of pixels. So you can use the edit path tool to tell which one is the vector and which one's the bitmap. So the vector is the better resolution. That's the one we want to keep. So I'm going to click on the selection tool and then click on the bitmap and then press delete or backspace to delete it. Great, so we have our image. It's a nice smooth vector, so it'll engrave really nicely, and you can just size that however you want. on your page. And so all you need to do for each of the images that you want to put on your bookmark is just repeat those steps with the different images. Another way you can add images to your bookmark is using the shape tools. So let's say I want to add some stars. Well, there is this star and polygon tool. You can click on that, and this lets you create polygons or stars. So if I click on stars, I can just click and drag and it should make a star. Now, if you don't get a star, that probably has something to do with the rest of these settings. So you need to make sure your corners are set to 5, because if it's set to like 3, that just makes a triangle. So you want it to be 5 or more if you want to make, different kind of stars. I'm going to make mine 5 corners. And then also make sure your spoke ratio is about 0.5, because if it's less, your star will kind of look like that. If you increase it too much, it makes it so it's not a star at all. So I'll set the spoke ratio there to 0.5 and press enter. And then you can also play around with the rounded value of your star. So if I decrease it, it'll make the corners really sharp. If you increase it, it'll make it a little bit more rounded. So maybe 0.1. Yeah, that makes a nice star with a little bit of rounded corners. That looks good. But I'm guessing this is a cut line right now. So we actually want it to engrave. So we want to make sure it's filled in with a solid color, preferably black. And so to do that, if you remember, we go into Object in the top menu, and then Fill and Stroke. And then remember, we have these 3 tabs to control the fill and the stroke. So under Fill, right now it's set to no paint. I'm going to click the solid square, and that'll make the fill a solid color. Now, black is best for engraving. If you make it a color, it just won't engrave as dark. And we don't need a stroke, because right now it has a solid stroke and it's set to 0.001 inches, which is a cut line. So with these settings, it would engrave our star and also cut it out. So that wouldn't really make sense. So in this case, let's just make it so there is no stroke. So I'll click that X. Okay, so then I can go back to the selection tool, and we can kind of rotate our star. We can resize it, and maybe you want to put like a bunch of stars. So you can copy and then paste stars to make multiples. Another good way to do this is just if you type in Control D, that'll just copy and paste, basically duplicate the object right over top of itself. So I did that. Now I can press Control D again and then just drag that copy, and we'll just make a bunch of stars. And then if I zoom in, you could also like size these a little bit differently. Some bigger, some smaller, and just make a design like that. Maybe add a couple more. Just do whatever feels right to you. Great. Now, another thing you could do if you didn't want to engrave these, you could reverse these fill and stroke settings, take the fill out, add in a solid stroke, and set it to 0.001 inches, because remember, that's our cut line setting. And now, instead of engraving this, it would just cut these stars out, which could give it a neat look. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to set them to engrave. Okay. And then maybe we'll add a few more stars down here to just kind of complete our design. Great. Maybe add a couple more down here. You know, just something like that. Cool. So we have a pretty cool looking bookmark now. One last thing you could add to it is maybe you want a hole in the top, and then you could add like a little ribbon or piece of string or something to it. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. We'll add a circle to the top of our bookmark and cut it out. So we can close the fill and stroke window here for now. And so to add a circle, we'll use the circle tool. And this works pretty much the same as the rectangle tool. It's just for making circles. So we'll click on that and then just click and drag on your screen. And to make sure you're creating like a circle with an even width and height, make sure you hold Control down when you're dragging out your circle. If not, you're just kind of freehanding it and it won't necessarily be even. So by holding Control, it always draws the circle evenly. And so just kind of eyeball it for now, and then we'll click on the selection tool and check the width and the height of our circle. So it's about 0.56, and 0.5 is usually about what I would make a circle for this type of thing. So that's pretty good. Let's just make it an even 0.5. So for the height and the width. Great. And then you just want to make sure that your circle is about 0.5 or more centimeters from the edge of the bookmark. If it's too close, then this little piece here will be really breakable. So just make sure you have enough space between the circle and the edge of our material. And so that looks pretty good. If you really want to make sure that this circle is perfectly centered on the bookmark, that's really easy to do. You just want to first select your circle and then also select our bookmark cut line. Now if I click on the bookmark cut line, you'll notice it selects it, but it doesn't select the circle. So we have to select both of them, and to do that, we'll first click on the first object, the circle, then hold Shift on your keyboard, and then select the second object. And then you can let go of Shift, but you'll notice now I have two things selected. And so to align this circle, we're going to go to Object in the top menu, and then down to Align and Distribute. And that opens this little menu here. And where it says relative to, it's basically what you want to align everything you've selected relative to. So right now it's to the page, which would just align both of these things to our page, which is not what we want to do. What we want to do is align our circle to our bookmark rectangle. And if you remember, first we selected the circle and then we selected the outer rectangle. And there's an option here to align everything relative to the last selected object. And that's what we want because we selected our rectangle last, and that's what we want to align our circle to. And so to align it this way, we want to click this button here that says center on vertical axis. So click that, and we notice our circle moves just a bit, so we almost had it perfectly centered, but now we know for sure it's perfectly centered. Okay, so then you can close out the Align and Distribute menu, and I'll just zoom out, and you can see now we have our awesome bookmark. It's totally done and ready to save. Actually, there's a few more things we need to do. So the first thing is with the text. I used a font on my computer. Now if I was to bring this into the hackLAB and engrave it, and this font wasn't installed on the hackLAB computer, then it would convert this to just a generic font. So to maintain compatibility, we'll just convert this from a text object to a regular path. So really easy, you just click on your text and go path, object to path. And now this is no longer a text object, so I can no longer edit it as text. It won't let me because it's no longer text. It's just a regular SVG path. So you always want to make sure you do that kind of your last step when you know you're not going to want to change your text. And then the next thing I'm going to want to do is position everything in the corner of the page so that when we run this job, it doesn't, jump down and kind of waste this material. The easiest way to do this actually is we just select everything in our design, and then we go to File, Document Properties, and then under the Page tab, and under Custom Size, click where it says Resize Page to Content, and then we can just click this button that says Resize Page to Drawing or Selection. And you can see it just automatically resizes the page right to our design, right to the edge. And if you want to give it a little bit of a margin, you can do that by right here where it says margins, top, left, right, and bottom. So you can just add, right now it's set to millimeters, so if I put a 1 in each of these boxes, it should add a 1 millimeter margin. So let's click that again. Take a look at our design, and we have a little bit of spacing. So that looks great. Last thing is just to save your file, and you're going to want to save it as a PDF. You might also want to save it as an Inkscape SVG, so let's do both. We'll go File, Save, and we'll just call this Bookmarks, and we're saving it as an Inkscape SVG. But the file we need, the file type we need to engrave this is a PDF. So we have to print from a PDF, so we're going to go File, Save As. We're going to keep the same file name, but under Save As Type, I'm going to click that and select Portable Document Format PDF. And then hit Save and just hit OK to these settings. And your file is all ready to be engraved. Alright everyone, that is it for this Tinkershop tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you have a great day. Thanks.